Cosmic here, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be talking about Grand Archive. I played in this event over the past weekend that had 108 players. It was open to all regions and honestly was just a ton of fun to play in. Now that said, the pricing was also pretty insane to my understanding. It was also sponsored directly from Weaves of the Shore and was just overall a great event to play in with a good amount of leader diversity or champion diversity, which I'm going to show off here. Also, something to consider is that I am very new to this, and for those that are probably going to end up watching this video, you might not be familiar with Grand Archive, but if you are, then I'm probably going to be saying a lot in this video that you just won't care about. But if you're new to Grand Archive, what I'm hoping to achieve is just go over a high-level view of these archetypes. If you haven't seen one of my meta reports so far, is I only cover the highest performing list of each archetype, and then the rest can be provided by a link or other sources. So I will have a link below in the pinned comments to Luxera's map link, which will have Omnidex's report of all the other lists in case you want to click through and see some of those other champions that you might be excited about. Now that said, the other kind of interesting part about Grand Archive, at least from a 10,000 foot view, is that yes, you have these champions, and if you go on their webpage, it's the very first thing you'll see is how important their champions are, how much they are from a story building perspective. And then you build decks and realize, well, largely doesn't matter, or at least you have the flexibility for it not to matter. So that's where things get a little bit interesting as we're trying to talk about these decks or talk about these archetypes, where I try to highlight at least the two different versions here for Sylvie, which is going to be the slime tribal style of deck. And then we have just aggro, which is in two different categories. And then lastly, the, die to magic bolt, right, kind of guy is your just general spell slinger Rai, which is really cool to see. So in general, if we look at the champion breakdown, this is what it would actually look like with the slimes taking up the largest percentage of this. I mean, 5 out of top 8 with really, really strong conversions certainly says something about the overall strength of the deck. But there is a major event that's happening next week, or I guess the time recording this weekend. So we'll have to wait and see if, people are just hiding their tech, or are slimes really that good? Again, full disclaimer, this is the first major event of this format, as the set had most recently launched back on May 17th. And I was having the opportunity to talk to some of the players, either in this event or some of the other events. I've been kind of diving all into Grand Archive over this next month just to see how much I'm going to like the game or not. But I've been talking to players from other regions that have either hit delays or their recollection decks really didn't come in on time, so they weren't able to really dig into those. So the other thing that I really want to get into from a top level, because I understand a lot of people watching this video from where I expected audience versus targeted, right? You are probably someone who has seen some of my other videos, because I've covered, 10 different trading card games on the channel at this point now, maybe 11, and you're just wondering like, oh, he's finally talking about Grand Archive. And I've already gotten some messages about it, so if you follow me on Twitter or know me on Discord, please feel free to ping me and ask more questions. But there's going to be, well, I guess limited time to ultimately cover this before I get ready for Worlds Beyond, which is my next big content thing that I'm really excited about. However, that does bring the point of the massive elephant in the room that we got to talk about is pricing. Now, yes, this is largely a Japanese trading card game YouTube channel. All things considered, I have done things like Magic Arena in the past. I've done things like Legends of Runeterra, but at least for the Legends of Runeterra and then the vast majority of other games I've covered, there has always been a key part about accessibility and pricing. And as many people know, I am very adamantly against Flesh and Blood from both the very questionable choices that LSS has made over the last year and a half to 2 years in particular, as well as the very unfortunate pricing that you're going to find. So yes, we do need to talk about the staple issues in Grand Archive as well, in kind of that same vein, right? So I want to cover the staples that we see in Grand Archive. And again, this video is largely going to be for people who have limited to zero background in Grand Archive. So if you've already been playing Grand Archive or kind of already know what I'm about to talk about, then feel free to skip ahead or skip to the comments below, where I'll have the link to the rest of the deck list if that's what you want to see. So with Flesh and Blood, a lot of that barrier really came back to the conversation of, oh, you only have to spend $500 in staples, why won't you buy into the game? Because then those $500 in staples can be used for these other decks where you might have to only spend another $100 to $200 to play something else. Oh, why not just spend $500? Why not just spend $700? Well, because in other trading card games or in other things that you might want to be traveling to, though, that can buy you multiple decks, or at least it provides a much lower barrier of entry competitively. And I need to stress the competitive part, as in you can top 8 with those cards going in those decks. And unfortunately, with how the market has been, and especially here in the States, I won't speak to every region, of course, but there has been an increasing amount of hard economic times for just overall. And it's not even just, one thing or the other or a certain market. Like, it just is a bad time for us in the States. That said, there are still other card games that people might want to check out, or their friends are checking out other games, especially when we have Bondi and Bushy Road and other companies, and especially if you want to do Force Will and Final Fantasy, right? There are still other cheaper competitive options that you can dive into that are saying, hey, what's a good entry point? And then you can go and play in the event and have fun. However, with Grand Archive, Grand Crusader's Ring, just the one that's a staple up front, this is just no matter what deck you're playing, here's $50, slam it on the table, and you have to go play it, right? You can get a competitive tier 1 Digimon deck for $50 and just go play at a major event, right? So the other part of this now varies a little bit. Academy guides, and yes, this is for playset cost of all of these. Academy guides, these are more limited, but it is going to be in a very expensive deck that I think when I totaled it all up, it was definitely around like the $600 or $700. And I believe that would be the top end of Grand Archive from at least the deck costs that I've seen. But the other issue that we're going to get into very, very quickly is that I do strongly believe that Grand Archive is going to continue to increase in popularity. As I mentioned in my previous video for Grand Archive, is that the recollection decks that they did were an absolute grand slam. Well done, Weebs of the Shore. And the downside that comes with that is that you have more people who want to buy into your game then, who are then going to eat up the very limited supply. At the time of recording, there is 0 reprint announced for Alchemical Revolution, which is the set that the Academy Guide comes from, which means this price is only going to increase. We are looking at the low-end price of Academy Guide. I would not be surprised if we do see an increase in events and just marketing in general from Weebs of the Shore. Academy Guides would be $100 card in a month to month and a half time, right? Now, yes, there are some boxes still out there for $140 on TCG Player if you want to play the gacha of getting that open, but out of a case, and a case is 6 boosters, because I've tried to look up this information myself, people were often getting only a single Academy Guide, which, again, out of 6 boxes is going to feel pretty bad coming from other games. So it's not even the case of an average person is going to be able to open a case and feel good about it, because then there's also so many misses still in Alchemical Revolution that it's Academy Guide, Carter, Eternal Kingdom, I think is the other one. There's only 3 to 4, and Spectrometer, whatever it's called. There's 4 okay cards to hit, and then everything else tanks in price. So you are taking a very big gamble on spending the $140 for that booster box, where hopefully, as we've seen with Grand Archive's first set, there is a Alter edition, which is basically goes back to the first edition versus the Unlimited edition with Flesh and Blood, which, spoiler, Weebs in the Shore, if you're watching this, Flesh and Blood did away with it for a very obvious reason. Let's not make the same mistakes twice, all right? So hopefully we will get to see that transition away from this price, because untruthfully, it is not sustainable in its current market. And so we're already seeing the market being a bit stressed with this within set 4, and also with the confirmed short printing of Regalia, which to a point makes sense because you only need 1, so you want to have it pop up less often, so it's a less of a feels bad for people to open it, but maybe they dialed it back too far, and now we're going to have $100 daggers within a month. It's not a good consideration all around. So I'm very curious to see how they tackle the Academy Guide issue, which is likely going to, rear its ugly head within the near future. Dungeon guides, while yes, they did have a ton of printing options for this, Dungeon Guide is basically an automatic staple in any deck that wants to go to level 3. Again, the good thing is all the best decks, it feels like, have a level 3 or at least have a level 2 that you want to speed into. So Dungeon Guide is another one that it'll just continue to increase in value just based on nature of the game. And maybe that's something else that I should have highlighted at a top level for those who don't know. Grand Crusader's Ring, because you're running a 60-card deck in 4-ofs, you just need to draw a card. The inconsistency of decks can feel really, really bad. Academy Guide, as I mentioned in many other videos for many other trading card games, it breaks the rules of the game and gets around it. It's a very good card. Dungeon Guide breaks the rules of the game, gets around certain things. It's a very good card. It's a neutral card. Gildus, best aggro card in the game by an absolute mile, even though it has a drawback of having balance, which admittedly a lot of decks, as you're going to see here later on, can actually, get around it or have a way to mitigate it where you're always getting that 4 damage. Now, that said, this is something, the last one where it's, if Grand Crusader Ring is the all-in buy-all, like every deck is going to want absolutely, Academy Guide, Dungeon Guide, and Gildas are maybe not something that you have to buy all playsets of up front, but it is something to know that if you are playing at all, you will likely have one of the other 3 in your deck at some point. Now, again, there are very small exceptions to this, and you'll end up buying other expensive cards for the deck, but instead of hammering this point home and probably drag down for this a little bit too long, I want to address this up front before getting into the lists themselves. So with that out of the way, let's actually talk about some lists. Now, again, this is going to be from the lens of you are either completely unfamiliar with Grand Archive and are looking to get in, or at least have a little knowledge and kind of want to know what topped and what did well. Otherwise, again, I will have a link to the deck list below where you can just see everyone who made top 16 kind of dig into it. They got posted this morning after I prepped the video and kind of the outlay I want to do and everything, so I didn't do anything more than top 8, but it will be there in case you want to dig into it. Now, again, I did get to play in this event. Unfortunately, I went 2-2 drop, and the people I lost to was Jesse, who won it all, and another player who placed 5th. And it was a rough go for me, to say the least. I was playing a Nico deck, and admittedly, I learned very, very quickly on that the shell that I took from somebody else was a very heavy control shell, and that is the exact opposite way that you want to build Nico. And I'll get a little bit more into detail as to why when we talk about a later list, but I didn't have cards to change it, so I was just stuck playing that list, and it didn't feel great. And what felt even worse than that, if I may add, was dying on turn 2 to this deck. And I know a lot of people are, because I've complained about it on Twitter, admittedly, or not complain, but it's part of the onboarding process. Like, the experience of learning Grand Archive is dying on turn 2 sometimes, right? So I was playing Tristan level 1, so for the agility 3 in the Nico deck, and on my turn 2, I'm like, okay, I don't have a hand that can really utilize agility 3, but if I get Safeguard Amulet, it is effectively the same amount of health as leveling up while being able to save my agility 3. It was, on paper, the correct play to make, right? For someone who's new to the game. I didn't realize the sheer amount of damage output that my opponent could put on by the Arcane Blast, double Arcane Study into Fireball, just being like, oh, sorry, you're dead, where unfortunately I did die with a Frostbind in hand, or I should say in memory at that point. So yes, hindsight 2020, I could have just saved the Frostbind and then won the game on the spot, but I'm at least pretty confident in saying, with playing this against this deck exactly once, that is not a normal line for our opponent to take on their turn 3 to just deal that much damage. Now, again, could be wrong, but that is how it went down. Unfortunately, I got fireballed out of the event, but Jesse did get a chance to take it all down with a 7-0 finish. Now, that said, what is right? I kind of hinted at it a little bit, but if you are someone who is just looking to sling spells at your opponent's face and just get value out of the game, that way it's just being these big combo plays where you're drawing a bunch of cards, getting to either do a big fireball or a big arcane blast for 11 damage, this is absolutely the deck for you. Now, the other thing I want to call out while I'm going through this, because I'm not going to call it out on every single slide, but effectively what I tried to do to the best of my ability was to look at hey, I want to build this deck, and what a lot of people will do is go to TCG Player, mass entry, what does it cost, right? Now, obviously, you can buy the Rye deck, get a lot of these cards, and then find singles the other way, but at least wanting to acknowledge that this game has a very real issue about not having sellers on TCG Player. And unfortunately, when your global audience looks to TCG Player as kind of your market value, as well as for those that have been in the scene long enough, you know how big of a deal it is when Card Market gets online, which, spoiler, doesn't have Grand Archive yet, it creates a pretty unhealthy dynamic for new players trying to enter the game. Now, that said, I want to let you know, Discord Marketplace is the place to buy Grand Archive singles. And in my 10 years of doing card game content, that has never been the case. It has always been either Facebook groups or TCG Player or eBay. So, unfortunately, I think there is going to be a little bit of a learning curve for people who are trying to onboard into Grand Archive, and there are quite a bit of singles available in the Discord Marketplace, to be fair, that people are, again, collectors are mass opening cases, trying to get their CSRs and just selling all the extras. So, again, there is a good single supply, there is a good price that you can look into, but you're not going to find it in an easily accessible place, which again is a huge negative for not only optics outside looking in, but then also for people just trying to get into the game and find those singles. So the difference in price here was just more of like looking on Discord, knowing how much I paid for certain cards, and just trying to give you a better idea of where that price point might land. But again, something to consider if you're looking into the game, and I'll talk more about price towards the end, but something that I have here is just like a ballpark price for every deck going forward. So with that out of the way, getting into now the deck lists themselves. As I mentioned, up first, we have Rai, we have spells, we have I want to just draw all the cards and throw big spells at your face. Now, the important things to call out about this deck in particular is that you have to survive. You are a deck that wants to get to level 3 as soon as possible, which is why we have things like Dungeon Guide, which again can cheat how many times you can level up in a turn. But then also, what's really cool about the interaction for this deck in particular, Dungeon Guide helps you banish cards into Stormseer's level 3 ability, which is going to help level him up, which is so important for things like Careful Study that gets a reduction based on how high your level is, as well as the Arcane Blast, which has efficiency but costs 11. So a lot of times what you want to end up doing is using Dungeon Guide to help get some of those cards you might not need extras of into your banish. It's going to make your other spells cheaper and then allow you to do multiple of those big spells per turn. And then Careful Study, which I found out just how good of a card it is, right? Getting 2 of them means you're going to draw 3 cards, and just getting to draw those extra cards while you're looking for a fireball to finish off your opponent turns out is very, very strong. Fireball itself doing damage based on level +1, and because you're a mage, it only costs 2. And what I really like about this deck is coming from, Magic primarily way back in the day, is that I really do love the draw ghost style of decks. And I haven't found a good pure control deck that wants to, play into that avenue in the same way. But at least these Rai decks, from what I've seen, have a good amount of fast interaction that really feels like you are playing on your opponent's turn or on the start of your turn before Recollection quite often. Now, the other things that we have are like Increasing Danger and the Black Market, which just helps fuel our get more card strategy, which can be really important for digging into those pieces. Other than that, how we're surviving most of the time is going to be things like Peaceful Reunion and Vanish from Sight, which is just a fog for the turn, more or less. Now, there is things like True Sight that your opponent can play to get around it, but generally speaking, we are just looking to survive a turn because it gives us another materialization phase, which means that we can level up or get some of those other pieces that we want. So if you are someone who wants to sling some spells and do massive amounts of damage with Fireball or Arcane Blast, then Rai is going to be a deck for you. Now, moving on from there, the really exciting thing that we saw is the Sylvie slimes are here and are really good conversion rates and made up a lot of the meta. But this is basically the Recollection deck with some upgrades. Now, unfortunately, again, the small disclaimer I'll make is some of those upgrades are quite expensive, and there isn't really a budget-friendly version of this deck. Now, yes, you could just take the Recollection deck +4 Dungeon Guide and go to your locals. If you don't have a purely cutthroat locals, please, it's a great way to get into the archetype and get into the game itself. However, we do need to talk about the issue with Twilight Slime and Vampiric Slime, which at the time of this recording were about 15 each, and then Bestial Frenzy, which are $35 a piece, and you're going to want 3 of them. So very quickly, you'll notice that you go from a $65 deck plus $100, if you find them for that deal, Dungeon Guide, so $165, escalates very quickly into a $450 deck to be, truly competitive, because things like Quicksilver Grail keep getting bought out on TCG Player. I just bought mine for $35. I think they got relisted for like $40, and this is in a set that nobody wants to open, so I'm very curious to see how they end up covering that in the near future. Now, something to note is that the Stone Scale band here is a Proxia's Vault card, so there are going to be some cards that you need to actually just proxy instead of buy. You can actually buy a promo card, that's like $15, but I took that out of the price when I was configuring the rest of this. So what is the Slime deck, right? It is just Slime Tribal, it turns out, but what's really funny is the first time that because I literally bought this deck, sleeved it up, went to locals. I didn't even know the difference between unit versus ally targeting, right? Because in a lot of other games, when you say unit, it means, well, that unit on the board, like the spirit, the human that you target, like the character you play on the field that's not your leader. And so I'm like, okay, Storm Slime is basically removal plus 3 damage. Oh yeah, that's pretty good. And then I found out that night, when I saw somebody else playing the fire version, which we'll talk about shortly, that Storm Slime just says, oh no, actually just burn you for 5, hit you for 3 off of a single card, which is quite good, it turns out. But then the important thing that I want to note here from the sideboard is that the Vampiric Slime and Bestial Frenzy combo is just so important to deal with all the ally decks, because effectively what you line up is Sylvie's level 3 lets you play these advanced elements, which again is going to be things like the Vampiric Slime. It comes into play, it gets you the 2 additional buff counters, which means it gets +2 health, +2 damage. Vampiric Slime enters as a 4/4. You use Bestial Frenzy, it becomes a 5/4, and it has effectively lifelink, meaning you're going to heal. And then so each unit that it hits for 5, you are healing 5. And that combo just kills ally decks cold. If they don't have an immediate answer for it, and if they can't respond to it, you win the game on the spot a lot of times because you just healed your entire life back up. And that's really important, as well as Twilight Slime, which gives your hero Spell Shroud, which means you have game against the Ray decks in case they're just trying to burn you out. Now again, Twilight Slime itself doesn't protect him. If you have 2, they create a lock for each other, but the thing is, it can still be targeted and only has, I think, 3 health if I remember correctly. So it can die, and you can't just die to kill the slime, kill you instead. That is still a very thing, but you want to have it in your sideboard as a way of protection. Other than that, what I really want to at least just add the disclaimer here between this list and the next one is that I do expect this list to evolve, or I should say both lists to evolve in 2 different directions, right? For this one, I would call it just more of like your toolbox variation where you have Gather the Slimes, which lets you look at the top cards of your deck, reveal slimes, heal that much, and then pick one, right? As we get more slimes in the future, and honestly, it works very well right now in this current list, we are just going to get more and more value out of that fast activation and being able to find that Vampiric Slime, right? When we are playing 60-card decks, we really just need another way to get that consistency package online, and that's why we're playing, Baby Gray Slime is insane. It draws, replaces itself. Forest Cake provides buff counters, replaces itself. Baby Red Slime gives you the filtering. So we do have a number of ways to help dig through our deck and find those big finishers like the Ethereal Slime or the Storm Slime, which can give us, the closing damage that we want. But ultimately, the Gathered Slimes, I think, is something that we're going to see a lot more of, hopefully in the near future, because of just how much value you can get out of it by finding the spirits that you're looking for. And then the other thing to mention here is that if you are playing this more toolbox variant, you then also get to play Slime King, which is the real reason why I wanted to play it. I just love this dude. His artwork is so great, but he also helps you get back extra slimes. So it's a 4/5 taunt, which you can give vigor based on your slime totem. So you're always hitting for 4, always having a 5 health taunt, and then if it dies, you are getting multiple slimes back with it. It is a very, very solid card to enable that strategy and making sure that you aren't running out of, key threats that you can play. Now, the other version of the list, which also went 6/1, is a fire base. So where the other spirit allows you to just play all those slimes of different basic elements, this one is just Spirit Fire. Both have draw 7, both have 15, but that's where you'll see that we have more of a Creative Shock, Cremation Ritual. We've seen this time and time again of just trying to increase the consistency this way instead of the Gather Slimes. Now, to be fair, between the 2 of them, I'm going to assume that something of a more red package and more aggressive is ultimately going to be a little bit better, because you still have the same top end possibility. You just have better ways to get there a little bit faster. And again, the Vampiric Slime, because you're both running level 3 Sylvie, can be played in both cases, and then having the Bestial Frenzy in the sideboard, because it's really only good against allies, but something that is a must play in your sideboard, that I really do like the fire version just a little bit better. And then, of course, Slime Eruption, just giving you some extra burn on top with the Storm Slime. So this one I would expect to see, and that's where we have like the Owl Familiar, right? We do have some of the other early plays that we can end up doing with this, but I would not be surprised if we see this shift a little bit lower to the ground in terms of those opening lines that you can make. Dungeon Guide, of course, helping you go into a level 3 strategy, because you do want to be level 3 to get to play these top end slimes, which are so important. And then, of course, when you're able to banish the slimes off Dungeon Guide to go into Storm Slime to get the extra damage because you're leveling up into Sylvie, creates a pretty interesting combo. So for both of these decks, one is definitely going to be more mid-range pilled, and this one's going to be a little bit more, aggressive in how it wants to be focused. Again, I think there's a couple more red cards we could also see into this, but it does give you two different options and how you want to build Sylvie overall. So something I definitely think a lot of people will like the flexibility of if you just want to play, Slimes the deck, right? Be it a mid-range or more aggressive focus shell. So definitely look into that and definitely consider your options. The other thing to call out here is the backup charger, which is just Grand Crusader's Ring at home. You materialize it in prereq, you put 3 down, pop it to draw a card. It's really just a second version of this. But what's been really interesting to see is just how many decks play a 1-of backup charger into turbocharge, because backup charger gives you a token, which that you then need to sacrifice to turbocharge, which then lets you draw 2 cards. It's just fine, honestly. Like if you have the extra material slot, it's just, and you can free up 1 card of a 60 card deck, right, for the turbocharge. Just throw it in there, have it a try of it just to see if it can give you that increase in consistency, because drawing cards in this game is just absurdly good, as it turns out, and turbocharge is going to let you draw 2 with the power cell token that you're already trying to get some value out of. Now, the other person that I had the deck that really opened up my eyes into just how else we can build Nico was Glass on a Water Ally. So again, these last 2 lists are really just going to be aggro variants, ultimately. Or at least how they played out in our matchup, and especially because they have the Gildas, which again is the $35 card we talked about up front, and then Sadie, which is out of the newest set, which is at, I think, actually 33 as I checked this morning, but another just really great card that's going to be increasing in price. And then because we are having the Assassin package, we have a bunch of Assassin support cards in here. Now, the thing I noted here is the TCG price and the actual price, you'll notice, are the same, because yes, this is actually very difficult to kind of put together from what I could tell, especially because it's either, random recollection stuff. You want to have the big leaders that everyone's very excited about in the set 4. You have 2 very expensive, aggressive units that you want to be playing, where I guess Sadie is definitely either, it can be aggressive, but it's definitely more like mid-range control style because of the agility 3 that you get, but still very good cards that are going to demand a high price. But again, having the Dungeon Guide and Grand Crusader's Ring means that some of this can at least transfer well to other decks that you might want to be playing. So other than that, since we haven't really talked about a Water Allies list, this is all about getting that value on board, being more aggressive with things like Frostwarn Paladin, which is going to be able to banish a floating memory, become a 3/4, draw you a card to replace itself. Very, very strong. We have the Frostbind Priest, which really, I got to find out firsthand how good this is. As long as they have balance, it gets insanely big defense, but then all your opponent's cards enter the field rested. And when I'm trying to put taunts on board or just play things that can then swing into their units, this is a card that's just very difficult to deal with. And then especially Water's key thing is that you're gonna have various amounts of interaction, like Frostbind, which can negate a card activation, or Song of Frost, which just says, hey, stop that attack, it doesn't happen anymore. Which I got to find out how good that was, because this was actually in I forget what it is now, like 20 games of Grand Archive in a tournament I've played now. I've played against Water once, which, spoiler, that might say a lot about this format in general, that most people are going to be on Fire or Wind, but I haven't got Song of Frosted yet, and I did in this tournament, and I was like, yep, I just lost my entire turn. That feels pretty bad. But other than that, we have things like Freezing Hail, which is more of just if your opponent is attacking you, or if they have a big unit on board, you can just ping it and then freeze it for the turn. So this one reminds me a lot more of like how Delver wants to interact. Ultimately, it doesn't have that same like low body threat that you want to be playing, but just a lot of that disruption package that we've seen out of Blue and Magic previously, especially things like Chilling Touch, where it can just yeet a card from your opponent's memory for a turn that they really might have been banking on and needed that extra card for a variety of reasons, be it to level up to go to 2 because they want to save it for another turn. Like even just Chilling Touch sometimes can really mess up your opponent's sequencing. So I do really appreciate the amount of, like, again, the Frostbind, the Chilling Touch, Freezing Hail, and Song of Frost, the amount of fun interaction that it has. And then Fracturize is just good for stopping problematic items. Yes, you give them a fractal, which means they just have a mono rock they can tap for 1, but oftentimes it can get rid of a problematic thing for you, and it also has floating memory, which is just so good and so much value that you can get out of it. And then the one that was really interesting to play against was the Trapper. Now, they are playing the Assassin package, which means the prep counter matters in other ways, but they can also give something -3 attack just by resting him. So it's one that, again, when you're trying to think about pushing damage and getting in those last couple points of attack, it can be pretty difficult to, stare down a trapper and be like, okay, well, if I'm trying to kill something on their board, no matter what it is, if I'm trying to kill it with a unit, they can just shrink whatever is the most important threat by 3, and my guy's going to live. So then you have to overextend into killing things like their Gildas. And yeah, this was just a rough deck to play into, especially when they open the Paladin and the Priest like every game. If I remember correctly, they only had Gildas one of the games, but fastest 2-0 of my life. This is also just a side note, but I think this is also the same game where I had like triple Fractal online. I milled 10 cards and I got 0 floating memory in the Nico deck that ran 33 floating memory. You can do the math on that. It's astronomically bad about how bricked I was in this matchup, but it was just a not good time. And then when they're applying that very early pressure very quickly, you can't afford to be bricked in those games. Like, you just will die on the spot. And unfortunately for me, that is exactly what happened. Now, if you want to play a different version of aggro and want to have different interaction, then boy, do I have a list for you that is thankfully a little bit more budget friendly. And I did add budget friendly here because if you were to just take out the Grand Crusader's Ring and the Gildas, it is going to be about $100 for this deck. Now, that said, you're going to want Gildas. I promise you that will be like the first upgrade that you end up doing. But when you don't have something like the Grand Crusader's Ring to get the extra draw to keep balance online, then, it's not something that you're too upset to miss. But things like Dream Fairy, which can bounce a card back on your opponent's board and make it to where you can't play them anymore, yeah, that is going to be pretty good. I think this card was like $7 last time I looked. I just bought my set recently for $6. So, there are going to be still cards that are worth a little bit, but this is again the same mindset of, oh, I want to get online. I want to just be able to attack with my good units on board. And then we do have a couple ways to interact with the board to either protect my guys, bounce my guys, prevent some damage, etc. Now, the one thing I will add here is that I did notice that there was a card from Recollection in here. So technically, you would buy the $65 deck and then get your play set of them, or you can go on TCG Player, and I think they're like $1 each. But if you can find the Recollection decks for $65, I would honestly just buy them. They're very good. You also get packs and sleeves and all this other good stuff. Talked about that in the other video. The Recollection decks are fantastic. But the other part here is now that if you're playing Tony, as everyone calls him, when you go into level 2, your next attack is going to get +3. We do have the heavy swing here that is going to be hitting for 6. So we still have this same mindset of there is a deck that if you really wanted to run a water aggro Tony deck with 4 heavy swing and 4 icebound slam, right? Let this be your neutral card and the rest just be water units. You can absolutely do that as well. And then suddenly you are now threatening an attack out of Tony that can do 11 damage as soon as you go to level 2. And it costs only 1 more than heavy swing. Like, yeah, I'm about it, because again, in a 60 card deck, it's not always going to be consistent, where ideally you'd want to see like a 5th or 6th copy of a heavy swing ish type card. So maybe it's a 4-2 split. I actually have to go back, and I'm very interested to see what the deck would look like once they have time to build it. But between these two decks, I'm like, okay, I know how to build Nico now. I know what is going to be the best Nico deck. Unfortunately, I think it is just going to be a little bit worse than some of the other decks. It's going to be like a fine tier 2 list. But as someone who just really liked that list, or I should say that champion overall, I'm really curious to see how else it gets built, because Ravishing Finale is just such a fun card. Yes, unfortunately, you always kill your opponent with the damage and not the mill. But I did at least get 1 mill game out of there where I was like, sorry, mill 52. And it does just say, feel good to say that. So same thing here. We have the, even Woodland Squirrels, which is a free 1/1 attacker, really wanting to lean into more of the aggressive package. It does help actually line up with Gildas very well if you're still trying to maintain the balance. And then, of course, just some of those other like hard to remove threats, because both Dream Fairy and the Assassin are going to have stealth, which is really important to say. Unless your opponent has True Sight, they can't attack into it, which means they're able to stay on the board more likely. And then we have things like Zephyr, which can just suppress target ally or Regalia, which means it's basically a blink effect, and then it comes back towards the end of the turn. So again, this one is just lining itself well up to be, more aggressive focus, play your efficient threats where you can, and then try to close out the game with a big old heavy swing sometimes when you can, because that is going to surprise your opponent for a lot of damage. I mean, just hitting for 9 is going to feel good a lot of times. And then some of the other things here I'll mention just at the end is we have seen some of these, fire resonance baubles or wind. It's really just extra draw at the end of the day. And then things like Nullifying Lantern are really important for some fire or even some of the water matchups where you just want to make all their cards norm element, where they then get less bonuses for some of their other cards. So something to keep in mind. But overall, I think between all of these lists, if you are looking for a good place to jump in and just want a more budget-friendly list, this is going to be the one for you. Now, yes, going back to it, and I did use the TCG player price, but this is the commentary around there is a relatively high cost to compete compared to other card games in the market today. So this will be very interesting to watch to see how it increases as more people check out Grand Archive. So definitely something to consider. And if you made it this long into the video, let me know in the comments below, how much is your average deck cost in the game you're playing, as well as what game it is, so we can have a fun little comparison at the end. So longer video, but I had a lot to talk about because I am going through like my random, 1 week into Grand Archive onboarding process. What does that look like, right? So definitely, keep that in mind with a grain of salt on maybe some of the things I've talked about, but I will be sharing my own thoughts and experiences with Grand Archive kind of over the next month, again, while waiting for Worlds Beyond, Evangelion launch for Battle Spirits, Fusion World, maybe a ban list, Shadowverse Evolve, waiting for Omens, right? I play a lot of card games that I, might not always do content on, but I help out or play locally. So Grand Archive is just landing in a good spot while it's kind of just waiting for everything else to take off. So I'm looking forward to exploring more of Set 4, but definitely let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the Slime Menace is here to stay and maybe a little too good, or will we see a big shakeup this weekend at the Ascent that is happening in Taiwan? Definitely let me know your thoughts. But otherwise, my friends, stay safe, stay hydrated, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.